So the Dow is up, the NASDAQ is down, and the S&P trimmed its weekly gain. Reports like this are familiar to anyone who watches the news. They're often the only economic data reported in the nightly newscast. But are those figures enough to judge the health of a nation's economy? Are there other indicators that better describe the condition of those not in the investor class? And more generally, does the health of Wall Street and America's stock markets necessarily reflect the overall economic health of American citizens? We examine the intersection of stock market wealth and economic health today on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
Thank you for joining us. I'm C.M. Winters Palacio from Malcolm X College. Joining me today are professors Linda Murphy from Wright College, Antonio Vasquez, also from Wright College, and former economics professor from Chicago State University, Michael Truett. Okay, the economy is such a dirty word these days. It's like the E word, right? Everything is going wrong.
We're back to being the dismal science again.
How so?
Well, we have bad news to report. That's basically what's going on. And you mentioned about measures that go out there. And I think an important measure for everybody is the level of unemployment in the country, because that is, consumption is one of the largest factors of the income, because every dollar spent by someone is a dollar earned by someone else in the economy. And with an unemployment rate of 9.1% and about 14 million people unemployed, right now, we also have some other numbers that aren't usually reported. We have 2.6 million people that have been looking for work for 12 months, but have stopped looking for work in the last month for an unknown reason. They may be just walking away. And we have another category called the discouraged worker. These people have seen their unemployment run completely out, and now they've just given up looking for work. They may be trying to do things under the table, but they're no longer even looking for a traditional job in the labor market.
Well, let me ask you this. When you turn on the TV and you see another report about the economy, Linda, what's your first response?
I take it with a grain of salt because I don't think it's all bad news. The economy is going through a bad time, but that doesn't mean that we have no future or no hope to do better. Some opportunities that are here are investing in real estate is an opportunity that is here, that hasn't been here for many years. I think that's a good sign, and that's something that I think down the road we will see that improving. Other opportunities, what do you think, Michael?
I think opportunities are very limited. It depends on what kind of economic news show I see. If I see numbers on employment or unemployment, if I see housing market numbers, then I kind of pay more attention to that. But overall markets, S&P 500, NASDAQ, things of that nature, I really don't pay too much attention to that because I don't really think they're indicative of the health of our overall nation's economic stability. So I kind of look at more of the things that, that move markets, such as unemployment.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so I am not an economist by far. However, I'm very familiar with my personal economic situation. And you have these conversations, you have these great conversations with your friends about the economy, and some are doing well and some aren't doing so well. How does a person interpret what they see on the news? To say, okay, how does this, I understand what's going on nationally, but how do you localize that information?
I think you localize it when you go out to buy items and you see what they cost and how it affects the decisions you make. So whether it's purchases in the grocery store or the price of gasoline, or whether you can buy stocks now at a lower price, these are decisions that are going to affect where you're going to put your money. Many people, Michael I was talking to earlier, are looking to invest in things like gold and silver more today than in the past. And given the large debt that the United States is carrying, the large debt that's over in Europe as well, I think those are opportunities also, perhaps to do better in the future by investing in those items rather than in traditional stocks. If you want to see quick gains, if you want to see long-term gains, I don't know. I think we're going to see them, but not right away.
Not right away, but so what do we do in the meantime?
Well, I wanted to go back to your question about where do you see some of these issues. And for example, I recently was going to a club to go listen to some music in Oak Park. And as I was going past, I remember what used to be a busy intersection now had a number of small stores closed. So while there's a lot of focus on Wall Street about the large corporations, while they do control a lot of the wealth and power through other means, the number of jobs that have been created since Clinton was in office are all in small businesses, and that's not really reported in the news. And for some of them, they've been able to make big changes. For example, a small family chain, H.H. Gregg, has just hit the Chicago area, and they've taken, which would be a sign of bad things, the border stores closing, and turned it into a positive for themselves. They've opened up and come into the Chicago market very strong. A small firm that's basically outside of the southern half of Indiana and in Kentucky, where my son was. And I was just really shocked at how good the service was, and they're taking it as an opportunity for growth. So there is some opportunity out there if you have the cash available and you can do it in a means where you're not going to put yourself at financial risk, which is.
Well, I'm be honest with you. I know when I watch the news and I see all the economic reports, I can't help but to be upset. I can't help but to be frustrated. Personally, I just cannot tolerate seeing another wealthy person telling me everything's okay or everything's going to be okay. You know, I'm on the other end of that stick. So then what happens?
Well, as economists, we can give advice about policy, but when it comes down to it, there's the political calculus to deal with. For example, the jobs bill before Congress. Now, I hate to be, it's cynical, but if I'm a Republican, do I really want to help Obama get jobs, or do I want to see him fall flat on his face and then be able to get myself elected and my party control the White House and the Senate? So there's a political reality to all of the issues that we as economists bring. There's a book called Economics is Religion, written by an economist. And in it, he talks about where he found himself not really arguing particularly so much about economic policy, but just trying to get other people to buy into the values of economics, that is, of having the most efficient outcome leading to the greatest number of goods and services for people. When he was working within branches of the government, often it came down to the politics within the department he worked in. And so we can give advice, but again, there's a political calculus to all that advice, and we can't control that. Right. And I'm sure with the political science, you can address some of that.
Well, I don't see, what do you have in Washington, what they call gridlock? And unfortunately, the way campaigns work is both parties want to come out okay in the next election. So the desire to cooperate with each other is unfortunately lower and lower. And that is creating more of the problems that I think we could be in a lot better shape if we really saw cooperation in Washington. But everybody's looking for the next election, and I don't know how we can do anything about it right now.
Yeah, it is quite disturbing. It's like oftentimes I feel like the working class and the middle class is kind of like the child that's sitting in the courtroom while the parents are going through the divorce. You know, it's like really, you know that you're important. You know that your name is constantly being called out. You know you're being referred to, but you really don't have a place. You're a pawn in the system. You're a pawn. You really feel like you're a pawn. You really don't have a place at the table. So how would a student, or even a professor who doesn't make the six-figure salary, how do they become an important pawn?
By voting.
Or a valuable pawn?
By voting them all out, so new people come in and maybe with some new ideas.
Michael? Is that true? Because some people would say with politics, you're just replacing one evil with another.
Well, I kind of think voting is overrated. I do think voting is important, but I think the process that leads up to that vote is just as important, and the process after that vote is important. So once you decide on a candidate and that candidate says what you agree with, and then it's up to each individual voter to kind of follow and track and see if they live up to their promises. And if they don't live up to their promises, then why? And was it a good adjustment? Yeah. So I think it's a matter of not only voting, but keeping representatives accountable for what they say and what they do.
Now, one of the favorite phrases that I love is called describing the water while drowning. I am just not in the mood to hear anyone else describe the water while drowning. I don't know about you. I'm drowning. I know my neighbors are drowning. I know my neighborhood is drowning. But people are frustrated. People are frustrated with this economy. And I don't even know if it's necessarily the economy as much as it is the effects. You understand what I'm trying to say? Mm-hmm. So then, beyond telling someone you need to vote, what do they do right now?
Everybody needs to get their own financial house in order. Mm-hmm. The country, the federal government is spending at, they're spending 40% more than they're taking in. That is not sustainable. And every individual needs to get their house in order. And really take it upon yourself to learn what it is you can afford and how to spend money that will make your future better. I used to work in a motorcycle store and I used to sell motorcycles, and I was astonished what went on there. And this was at the height of all of this easy money, okay? And people would come in, the average credit rating of people who came into the store was 300 to 500. That was their credit rating. Mm-hmm. They were all getting financed, virtually all of them were getting financed. The only question the buyer had on his mind was, can I pay the monthly payment?
Exactly.
The same thing happened in the housing market. The housing market was wide open. The regulations had been completely withered away by lobbyists or what have you, and the banks weren't doing the right thing either. But the people who were taking out loans, many of them were doing it knowingly, and many of them were doing it unknowingly. But you've got to have rules in place, because who is it going to fall on? Why should we all suffer because these loans were given out to people who couldn't afford it? I have people, like my last thing is I had a friend of mine who earned about $65,000 a year, and he was offered a $500,000 mortgage. That was the standard. That is not affordable. No one who's earning $65,000 a year can pay on a $500,000 mortgage. So I think we all have to educate ourselves, unfortunately, as to what we can afford, so that we can end up, when we retire, having something there.
And I think to add to that, it's beyond the scope of just what can you afford. It's exactly how are you doing your daily spending. What's your daily economic conduct? I know in my household we've made a firm decision to do as much local business as possible. You know what I'm saying? We've made a personal decision to work with small businesses as much as possible. Anytime that I can avoid a larger store, I feel like that I'm sticking it to the man, you know. I'm like, one more time, you know. I'm just not in the mood to help anyone else become any more wealthier than what I am.
I want to feedback something that you said in terms of your watching and getting your own household in order. And yes, as Linda was correct in saying, at one time in the U.S., we had our savings rate was negative. That is, we were just saving. For every dollar of income that was coming in, we were spending $1.03. So we were borrowing from the rest of the world, which is bad. The issue right now that has been out by a lot of economists is this old problem that was highlighted by John Maynard Keynes in his book that started the seminal book for macroeconomics, the paradox of thrift. That is, if you save money and Michael saves money and I save money and Linda saves money, all the businesses that would be earning income from us can't pay their workers. And so that if everybody collectively saves money at the same time, remember that every dollar spent is a dollar earned by someone else. That one of the biggest slowdowns we've seen is in spending, and the people are saving more, which is good. But one of the problems is we're saving so much that firms are saving. They're hesitant to go out and invest in new factories and get new employees. The households some are very nervous about entering into the housing market, while Linda's correct that right now housing affordability is at some of the best it's been in decades in terms of being able for a middle-class family to afford a single-family home.
If the middle class is around.
Right, and if they're not fearful.
Yes, if the middle class is around, because what I'm saying, I understand what you're saying is that your housing is so affordable right now, but they're just, for every
if you don't have a job, you can't buy one.
Affordable home, there are 4 people who he can't even afford that.